They told you to work harder, save more, skip the takeaways, and stop buying lattes. But here's what they didn't tell you. You're not priced out of homeownership because you're lazy. You're being outbid by corporations. In 2025, the dream of owning a home in the UK isn't just slipping away. It's being bought up in bulk. By who? Private equity firms, corporate landlords, and overseas investors who see your future home as nothing more than an asset on a spreadsheet. Meanwhile, salaries have barely moved. Mortgage rules keep tightening, and entire developments are now being built, not for families to buy, but for renters to occupy. This isn't just a housing crisis, it's a housing takeover. And if you're a first-time buyer, you're being locked out by forces far bigger than your bank account. In this video, we're counting down the top 10 UK cities where buying a home is out of reach for first-time buyers and exposing the hidden forces behind the crisis. Smash that like button, subscribe to the Globe Realty, and turn on the notification for real estate truth you won't find in the headlines. Drop a comment. Is renting becoming your only option too? Number 10. Birmingham. We kick off this countdown in the heart of England. Birmingham, a city once considered a working-class stronghold of affordable housing. But today, it's a very different story. At first glance, Birmingham might not scream unaffordable. After all, it's not London. But don't be fooled. Beneath the surface, the city is becoming a pressure cooker for first-time buyers. Homeownership here is declining faster than the national average, and there's a clear reason why. First, look at the explosive growth in the private rented sector, PRS. Over 30% of households in Birmingham now rent privately, far above the national average. What does that mean? It means more people are stuck in long-term renting, not by choice, but by necessity. And here's where it gets even tougher. Birmingham is a hotspot for build-to-rent (BTR) developments, which are largely owned by corporate landlords and foreign investors. These massive housing blocks aren't being sold to locals. They're being snapped up by institutions, locking average buyers out. First-time buyers are caught in a triple threat: wages that haven't kept up with property prices, mortgage criteria that remain stringent post-pandemic, and a housing market increasingly designed for renters, not owners. The city's central location, major regeneration projects, and strong rental yields make it a magnet for investors, but a minefield for young professionals and families looking to buy their first home. So if you're thinking Birmingham is still a starter city, think again. The numbers don't lie, and the window for affordable ownership is rapidly closing. Number 9. Southampton. Southampton, known for its maritime legacy and bustling docks, is fast becoming a case study in how a thriving city can still be completely out of reach for aspiring homeowners. Behind the surface of economic activity lies a housing market that's quietly locking out its next generation. First-time buyers here face a particularly steep climb. While Southampton isn't among the UK's most expensive cities on paper, it's the combination of stagnant local wages, surging rents, and a shrinking pool of affordable starter homes that makes the situation so difficult. The average house price in Southampton has been climbing steadily, with starter homes routinely priced far above what median earners can realistically afford. But the real kicker? Southampton's private rented sector now dominates, with more than half of all residents living in rental accommodation, a figure that puts the city well above the national average. For many, renting is no longer a temporary phase, it's the permanent alternative to homeownership. Add to that the rise of institutional landlords and build-to-rent developments, and the dynamic shifts even further. Entire apartment complexes are being developed not for sale, but for long-term lease, often owned by investment funds and managed for profit, not people. This leaves local buyers competing with corporate strategies and global capital, not just other families. Moreover, the presence of a large student population and young professionals means demand for housing is consistently high, keeping rental prices elevated and savings for deposits nearly impossible to build. In Southampton, the problem isn't just affordability, it's access. Even those who do everything right financially are often sidelined by a system designed to benefit institutional investors over individuals. For first-time buyers, this city is increasingly becoming a harbor for renters and a departure point for the dream of ownership. Number 8. Norwich. Tucked in the east of England, Norwich might not be the first place that comes to mind in the housing affordability debate, but for first-time buyers, it has quietly become one of the most inaccessible cities in the UK. The problem in Norwich isn't just about house prices, though those have surged, with the average property now topping £270,000, up nearly 30% over the past 5 years. What's more pressing is how supply and demand are completely out of sync, especially for entry-level buyers. Norwich has experienced significant net inward migration, especially since the pandemic, as remote workers seek out more livable cities with historic charm and green space. That influx has spiked competition, especially in the lower to mid-end of the market. First-time buyers, often armed only with help-to-buy ISAs or modest deposits, are being outpaced by equity-rich relocators and buy-to-let landlords targeting the city's growing student and commuter population. Unlike some larger urban centers, Norwich has limited space for new large-scale developments. The city's medieval street layout, protected greenbelt land, and tight planning restrictions mean new housing supply is chronically constrained. This bottleneck has led to fierce bidding wars, even for modest terraces. Crucially, the local economy, dominated by education, healthcare, and public sector jobs, has wage levels below the national average, making mortgage affordability a steep climb. And with rental demand high, many potential buyers are trapped in costly leases that make saving for a deposit incredibly difficult. Norwich's picturesque setting and quality of life make it an attractive destination, but behind its cobbled streets and cathedral spires lies a housing market increasingly designed for the affluent, leaving first-time buyers standing on the outside, looking in. Number 7. Leicester. Leicester is a city that's long prided itself on affordability and accessibility, a diverse Midlands hub where families, students, and working professionals have historically found balance between cost of living and opportunity. But that balance is tipping, and fast. Over the past decade, Leicester's house prices have risen by more than 60%, outpacing local wage growth by a wide margin. As of 2025, the average house price sits around £285,000. Yet the city's median income remains well below the UK average. For first-time buyers, that mismatch has created a painful affordability gap. What makes Leicester's case especially concerning is the sharp rise in demand without proportional supply expansion. Post-COVID migration patterns brought an influx of buyers from larger, more expensive cities seeking better value in the Midlands. That increased pressure on a housing stock that was already struggling to keep up with local population growth. Leicester is also one of the fastest-growing urban areas for young families and first-generation homeowners, but many of them now find themselves stuck in an overheated rental market. According to local council data, over 53% of households under 40 are now renting, a major increase from a decade ago. Unlike some cities dominated by institutional investors, Leicester's challenge is more grassroots. An overheated second-hand housing market, driven by small-scale landlords, buy-to-let investors, and rising student housing conversions. This has pushed up prices in traditionally affordable neighborhoods like Highfields and Westcots, making them increasingly inaccessible for entry-level buyers. With limited new builds, intense demand, and rising mortgage barriers, Leicester has evolved from a stepping stone for homeowners to a city where many are permanently stuck renting. The window for buying in remains open, but for many first-timers, it's just too far to reach. Number 6. Liverpool. Liverpool is often listed as one of the UK's most affordable cities, on paper. But affordability isn't just about the sticker price. It's about who can actually buy. And in Liverpool, the gap between property prices and purchasing power has grown into a chasm. Yes, average house prices here hover around £180,000, significantly below the national average. But here's the catch. Liverpool also ranks among the lowest for average full-time wages, with many workers earning under £30,000 per year. When combined with high deposit requirements, strict mortgage criteria, and the lingering impact of inflation, even modest homes become financially unreachable for first-time buyers. Compounding the issue is the rapid expansion of the private rented sector. Over 53% of residents in the city center now rent privately, according to the latest ONS data. a sharp rise that reflects both increasing demand and institutional activity. In recent years, Liverpool has become a hotspot for property investors, drawn by high rental yields and regeneration-led growth. Entire streets, especially in areas like Baltic Triangle and Rope Walks, have seen a shift from owner-occupier housing to investor-owned buy-to-lets and short-term rental units. Moreover, the city's ongoing regeneration boom, while bringing economic investment, has also contributed to gentrification in several central zones. New developments cater to professionals and student populations, but rarely to first-time family buyers. Planning approvals for luxury flats and student pods far outpace those for affordable housing. Liverpool's property market, in short, looks accessible until you actually try to buy in. Between low wages, intense investor interest, and a rental system absorbing local housing supply, many first-time buyers find themselves priced out of a city that once promised opportunity. The homes are there, but ownership, increasingly, is not. Finding this eye-opening? Then don't just watch, get involved. If you're a first-time buyer, a renter, or just frustrated with the state of UK housing, hit that like button. And if you're new here, subscribe to the Globe Realty for deep dives into real estate truths no one else is talking about. Let's get back into the countdown. Number 5. Cambridge. Cambridge, world-renowned for its university, tech cluster, and scientific breakthroughs, has become one of the most intellectually rich cities in the UK. But for first-time buyers, it's also become one of the most financially unforgiving. The average property price in Cambridge now exceeds £540,000, according to HM Land Registry data. That's nearly double the national average and far beyond what most young professionals, key workers, or local families can afford. And it's not just about the price tag, it's about who's driving demand. In recent years, Cambridge has emerged as a global tech and life sciences hub, with multinational firms and research giants setting up shop in and around the city. With them came high-income international talent and investor interest. Entire neighborhoods have seen bidding wars sparked not by families, but by corporate relocations, offshore buyers, and buy-to-let investors chasing long-term growth in a market known for stability. The city's conservation policies and limited land availability add another layer of difficulty. Strict planning controls restrict large-scale housing developments, which has led to a chronic shortage of new homes. Supply is constrained, demand is global, and the result is a housing market completely out of sync with local earnings. Even with shared ownership schemes and government incentives, the deposit requirements alone in Cambridge are often insurmountable for young buyers. And for those renting while trying to save, the average monthly rent, well over £1,500 for a modest flat, can quickly erase any chance of building a deposit. Cambridge may be a city of ideas, but the idea of buying your first home here? For many, it remains purely theoretical. Number 4. Nottingham. Nottingham has long marketed itself as one of the UK's most affordable urban centres, a city with a thriving student base, cultural buzz, and housing prices that appear modest compared to national figures. But beneath that reputation lies a growing crisis for first-time buyers. As of 2025, the average house price in Nottingham has climbed to just over £230,000, still below the UK average. But when measured against local income levels, that figure becomes deeply problematic. The city's affordability ratio is now one of the worst in the Midlands, with lower-than-average salaries and limited mortgage access pushing many hopeful buyers to the sidelines. But what really sets Nottingham apart, and pushes it to number 4 on this list, is its outsized dependence on the private rented sector. According to the latest housing surveys, over 54% of all households under 40 in the city are renters, one of the highest proportions outside London. Much of this can be traced to the city's enormous student population, which has fueled the rise of student lets, HMOs, houses in multiple occupation, and professional rentals. And that's where the trap begins. Investors have flooded the market, particularly in areas like Linton, Dunkirk, and the Arboretum, snapping up traditional first-time buyer stock and converting it into high-yield rentals. This has left local buyers competing not with other families, but with seasoned landlords who buy in cash, flip properties into multi-tenant units, and reap the returns. Planning permissions in Nottingham have also favored high-density private blocks, often luxury flats or student accommodation, over genuinely affordable family housing. The result? An oversupply of units that aren't fit for first-time buyers and an undersupply of homes that are. Nottingham's housing market has shifted decisively, from one of opportunity to one of imbalance. The promise of affordability still exists in theory, but the reality on the ground is far less accessible. Number 3. Salford. Salford has undergone one of the most dramatic urban transformations in the UK over the last 2 decades. Once overshadowed by its bigger neighborhood Manchester, Salford is now a magnet for developers, investors, and media giants, thanks in large part to the arrival of Media City UK, the BBC, ITV, and a wave of regeneration projects. But this boom has brought with it a very different kind of housing market, one that increasingly excludes first-time buyers. As of 2025, the average property price in Salford has surged past £270,000, a 75% increase from a decade ago. While that number may seem modest compared to places like London or Cambridge, the problem lies in how the local market is structured. Salford is now dominated by build-to-rent schemes, luxury apartment blocks, and corporate ownership. Entire waterfront districts, such as Salford Quays and Greengate, have been developed not for sale, but for long-term leasing. These are units owned by institutional investors, managed by letting agencies, and priced out of reach for most local residents looking to buy. Meanwhile, traditional family housing stock is drying up, with developers focusing almost exclusively on 1- and 2-bedroom flats aimed at renters. There's little inventory left for owner-occupiers, especially those entering the market for the first time. Local income levels haven't kept pace either. Despite the presence of high-paying media and tech jobs, the majority of Salford's population still earns below the national average. That means the average resident is now competing for housing with relocating professionals, investors, and overseas buyers, often without the financial leverage to keep up. In Salford, regeneration was meant to spark opportunity, but for first-time buyers it has created a landscape of gleaming towers, ever-rising rents, and a stark reality. The homes may be new, but the doors remain closed. Number 2. London. No list about housing accessibility in the UK would be complete without London, a city where ambition thrives, but for many the dream of homeownership does not. As of 2025, the average house price in London sits at around £525,000, though in many boroughs it easily exceeds £700,000. For a first-time buyer, that means a deposit in the region of £50,000 to £100,000 just to get in the game. And that's before factoring in rising interest rates and stricter lending rules. But London's housing crisis isn't just about high prices, it's about who owns the city. More than 30% of all homes in London are now rented privately, one of the highest proportions in the country. And a significant share of those properties are held by overseas investors, private equity firms, and corporate landlords who have turned entire neighborhoods into investment portfolios. Prime areas like Kensington, Mayfair, and Canary Wharf aren't just expensive, they're increasingly empty, occupied by assets rather than families. Meanwhile, build-to-rent developments continue to rise across zones 2 and 3. These are sleek, high-density apartment blocks built not to sell, but to rent, permanently. Many are managed by global investment firms offering concierge services and inflated rents, but zero path to ownership. Even in outer boroughs once considered accessible, like Barking, Croydon, or Haringey, prices have surged as demand spills outward. First-time buyers often find themselves priced out everywhere, not because they're financially reckless, but because they're competing against global capital with no upper limit. London remains a global powerhouse, but it has evolved into a city where property is power, not shelter. For aspiring homeowners, the struggle isn't just financial, it's structural. The game was rewritten long ago, and it was never meant for them. Number 1. Manchester. At number 1, we arrive at Manchester, a city once celebrated for its industrial resilience and working-class accessibility. But in 2025, Manchester holds a new title: the most inaccessible major city in the UK for first-time buyers. Here's why. Manchester currently has the highest proportion of private renters among the UK's major cities, with over 62% of city center residents living in rented accommodation. That figure alone signals a seismic shift. Renting isn't a stepping stone anymore. It's the new default. In the last decade, Manchester's property market has undergone a rapid transformation. Fueled by regeneration schemes, rising graduate retention, and the northern business boom, the city has become a hotbed for domestic and international investors. Towering build-to-rent blocks now dominate the skyline, purpose-built developments owned by institutional landlords not intended for individual sale. What's left for first-time buyers? Very little. Prices have soared. The average property in Manchester now costs over £295,000, a sharp climb from just £180,000 10 years ago. Meanwhile, local wages have failed to keep up, creating a dramatic affordability gap. And because so much new housing is built specifically for rent, the supply of accessible starter homes has withered. The problem is structural. Developers prioritize investor-friendly flats. Corporate landlords consolidate units, and city planning increasingly caters to yield-driven strategies rather than owner-occupier opportunities. For first-time buyers in Manchester, the market is not just unaffordable, it's fundamentally unwelcoming. Even with a stable job, good credit, and a disciplined savings plan, the average young buyer finds themselves edged out by institutional capital and policy inertia. Manchester's rise has been impressive, but it has come at a cost. The very people who built its energy, culture, and workforce now find themselves locked out. The housing ladder hasn't disappeared here, it's just been pulled up. And there you have it. This isn't just a market shift, it's a generational fault line. But understanding the data is the first step toward change. Because behind every glossy high-rise and rental brochure is a deeper question. Who is our housing system really built for? This is the Globe Realty, and we don't just talk real estate, we expose what's really going on. Hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell. Until next time, stay informed, stay empowered, and keep asking the hard questions.